Hey guys, this is Mike from Deepwood Force of Will, coming at you with episode 2 of our metagame analysis. This is a video series where we just talk about the state of the metagame, what's going on, what's topping, and today's episode is focusing on the metagame post Return of the Dragon Emperor. This video is being created basically just about a week after the three latest GPs at this time, being GP Montreal, GP California, and GP France. So, 3 tournaments. We'll see what's going on right here. So, at a glance, we've got a couple of pivot charts here. The first one over on the left there is the Montreal GP ruler breakdown. Credit to Carta Magica Montreal. I hope I pronounced that right. If not, I do not speak French. So, the ruler breakdown is as follows. We got a lot of Persia, a lot of Feetsing, decent amount of Fox, and then decent amount of Gil, Zero, Lumia, Val, and then all the rest. So, out of 107 players, it's a pretty well-balanced turnout to that tournament. A couple of notable players came to this tournament. A lot of the on-tilt gaming guys were there, including the Miles brothers, off the top of my head, so definitely something to look forward to with those deck profiles. Over on the right there, we have the California GP. That's broken down with 198 players. Credit to Stephanie Shaw for posting this data on here. I just put together the chart for it. So again, we see a lot of Persia, a pretty decent amount of Alhamat, still another decent amount of Feetsing, and then Lumia, Fox, Gil, all the rest in there. So, also on the bottom there, we have the it's a little hard to read just because I had to try and fit it on there. This is the breakdown for GP France, thankfully provided by David Hartley. Again, we've got a lot of that Persia. About a quarter of that tournament out of 100 players were playing Persia, and then everything else was pretty low in comparison. So, what we can see from here, Persia is good. Persia is really good, and Persia is well represented in the players. A lot of people tended to bring her, and going to the next slide, we can see, that's a lot of Persia in top cuts. This data is taken from the 24 players who were in top 8 spots at all 3 of those Grand Prix. As we can see, Persia took up a vast majority of the top 8 area, even with the amount of variety we see in the rulers. Along with that, we've also seen a lot of Fox. A lot of that was put up by France. We saw 2 Fox players in the top 8 in France, which was great to see. We got 3 Gil Hamets in the top, and then 1 of each of Feetsing and Valentina. Now, the interesting part of that is the fact that Feetsing, the only one on here, happened to take first place at the California region, I believe. So, beating out the Persias, beating out everything else, Feetsing remained dominant there. So, again, it's not just the ruler, it's also the player, it's also the build, and we can see that people are definitely getting a little more creative with their builds, especially when we see the Persia builds, because very few of the Persia builds ended up remaining the same, except for the fact that 3 of the on-tilt gaming guys ended up bringing the same Persia build exactly. So moving forward, the queen of our metagame right now, we got Persia, True Beastmaster, and Reincarnated Maiden of Flame Persia. So what makes Persia so good? Well, for starters, she has a turn 2 OTK. If you don't know what that OTK is already, I definitely suggest watching some videos on it or reading the Grinning Remnant article. Shout out to you boys. So, Persia herself is, on her ruler side, has Judgment of 2, which is very cheap for what she does. Energize for either fire or wind. Resonance for fire and wind. With fire, you can give your target resonator swiftness. With wind, you can give target resonator flying. So, all that's great. That's really good for making your resonators just do more. When flipping to the other side, we've got Persia, the Reincarnated Maiden of Flame, 1,000. When she enters your field or attacks, you can put a resonator on the bottom of your deck and reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a resonator, you put it into play. Or you can do the same with a magic stone. Put that at the bottom of your stone deck, put the top card of your stone deck into your field. Now, the best part of the fact is that you get your God's Art here, which is essentially recover her and then Pumpkin Witch yourself for the rest of the turn, giving everything you control swiftness and flying. That's some insane value. That gives you a ton of OTK potential. Now, obviously this is what makes Persia really good. She's extremely aggressive, can just make your resonators great, which is why we see the following cards always in here. So, Sacred Elf, Valentina, and Death Scythe are 3 cards you need for that second turn OTK. Sacred Elf being a main offender and producing more mana, Valentina being that ever hated card that gives you J-Reload Swiftness and just extra stats and imperishable, yada yada yada. And Death Scythe or any other Pump Regalia just being enough to set your attack to 2,000 and allowing you to swing twice for 2,000, which is 4,000, which makes your opponent dead. Moving on to player's choices, this is where things get interesting. On the right here you can see Jack climbing the Beanstalk and Fiery Fox Reincarnation. These were both featured on the On-Tilt Gaming deck builds. Giving Jack flying or swiftness and having Fiery Fox Reincarnation to trigger that resonance again and again is what really sets the deck apart, because once Jack swings in for damage, you can banish it and search your deck for a Skyscraper Giant and put it into your field. Doing that play with Jack as early as possible and getting a Skyscraper Giant out that your opponent just cannot answer in the early game with some crazy board presence and just is insane tempo play. Over on the left here we have Spinning Myths, which is definitely another thing to look out for, because the build that topped in France was playing 4 Spinning Myth and 4 Izanagi. Now if you don't know, Izanagi is an 11/11 myth who, when he enters the board, you remove 3 cards on the field from the game, and he gains +3/+3 for each of those. So he's essentially a 2,000/2,000 that comes out for 3 with Spinning Myths. But that's not all, because not only that, Spinning Myths has Torrent, put the top card of your Magic Stone deck into your field, which means that once you play the Izanagi, you get the top card of your Stone deck. If that card is a Firestone or a Windstone, or even both, Izanagi can gain Swiftness and Flying. That's some really insane value. So, Spinning Myths is definitely a card to look out for as well. All these builds are actually based off of the Resonators getting more value, rather than just doing the OTK, but still has the potential to OTK. And that kind of unpredictability and that kind of option, those kind of options can just really turn the tide of the game, which is why these builds saw a lot of popularity over the all-in OTK aggro builds that some people brought. Now, you might be asking, oh, Persia is so hard to beat, how do you counter it? Well, glad you asked. On the left we've got Death Scythe, the Life Reaper. This is obviously to make Persia lose swiftness. Not really much else to say about it. Black Moonbeam to the side there. Having Black Moonbeam available to just kill Persia if she's trying to go for that OTK. If you're playing Gil Alhamet, you can use it for free and you can search it out. That's insane. So that makes Gil automatically a great answer to Persia. And then over on the side, if the Resonators are giving you trouble, Gale Force is just such a good card. You can, if your opponent's Persia happens to flip over a greenstone, target something that they control, for 1 mana you Gale Force it away and you're just basically done with that card forever. So, these are all really good options to try and counter all the specific builds that Persia does. Obviously there's not a 1-card counter for every Persia deck, so be warned, it is a little unpredictable at times, but there's definitely a lot to work with there. And moving forward, speaking of control, we got the King of Control himself. Gil Alhamet is just probably the best control ruler we've seen in this game. Black's always been a great control color, White's offered some good control, and then on top of that, Gil is able to just produce any color to play Ancient Magic cards. Now, Ancient Magic cards are most of the time pretty good cards, but a lot of them help the consistency of your deck. And from that point, having a control ruler that can just kind of refill his hand and build a board state or a hand state is just such a good... It also gives you alternate win conditions. Like Steam Explosion is a card that you can essentially play for free and deal extra amounts of damage to your opponent out of nowhere. So watch out for Gil. He'll probably only remain on that first side you see all the way to the left. If he ever hits the second side, know that your opponent's trying to just deal some damage. And if he ever hits the third side, know that you deserve the loss. Because nobody should ever get to that third side of Gil. Obviously, one of the big selling points of Gil is the searchable free Black Moonbeam. This card is insane. Players can't chase to it. It kills Persia. It's good. Run it. Gil Stone, Ancient Magic Stone, is actually really phenomenally built. Obviously, it's a light and darkness magic stone. You can produce light or darkness with that. But you can also remove a mana counter from your J ruler, which is obviously going to be Gil-Alhamet, to produce any color. So it's essentially a rainbow stone for a slight cost, which is not a bad thing at all. So you can toolbox your deck. You have infinite varieties of things you can play. The card's just absolutely insane. And then moving on to the side, see Amaterasu's Foresight. This is kind of the pinnacle of all white control cards at this point. It's a 2-mana quick cast, light chant, that prevents all damage that would be dealt by J Resonators this turn. This means that J Rulers, Resonators, none of them can deal any damage, not to you, not by battle, not by effect. So having just something to blanket over the field and keep everything alive for a turn, keep yourself alive for a turn if need be, is just very good to have, especially when you have extra will open because you're using mana counters to really provide your support rather than your actual mana itself. So having these options is very, very, very potent. Moving on to your other options. Ancient Knowledge is a card that's become ubiquitous with Gil-Alhamet. Just being able to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and draw 2 of them. Being able to cycle through your deck as a control ruler is incredible. Blazer Prisoner of Flame has seen some stints of use in the deck. Just a high value swiftness, flying, 4 cost that can just recur itself from the grave in the late game. Playing the late game is something that works really well to Gil's advantage, and having such a huge late game threat like Blazer is very, very important. And then, as I mentioned before, Steam Explosion is a free damage option that can both kill a Resonator and can also attempt to kill your opponent. So, burst damage options are always helpful, and Steam Explosion is no exception. Now, how do we beat that? Well, first things first, counting the toolbox means that you have to really focus on denying spells, denying big things, and there's no better denial card than a cancel spell like Seal of Wind and Light. Also, things that aren't targetable by chance, because control decks are so chant heavy, Skyscraper Giant really helps out with your control matchup, especially when you're against Gil-Alhamet, which is why the builds in Montreal did so unbelievably well. Having Skyscraper Giant for that counter for the control mirror match is just so unbelievably strong. And then over on the right there we got Sha Wu-Jing. Sha Wu-Jing is a card that sees very fringe play, but makes your opponent pay 1 more to play chance, so having your opponent have to put in more resource in order to play the control game is definitely something that helps out your curve a little bit. And moving on to the others of those top spots, obviously we had a couple of Fox. Fox obviously being good just because Judgment of Zero and having just 12/12 flyers and big things that eat other stuff like Amit just makes it really, really good for facing the Persia control matchups. For facing Featsing too. Featsing does not like to have their Gwybers get eaten by Amit. The only problem you'll ever have with Fox is not hitting your Killing Stones, which is a reason that a lot of people tended to drop Fox once Lumia Hook became a big part of the metagame. Worth noting, a lot of people ended up bringing Red Fox, which was focused on End of Days, which is a new card that can bring back X number of Resonators from the grave, so you can recycle your resources or even your Chimeras, and then gain their effects again, sack them off. It's a very, very synergistic card with big decks, so definitely keep a lookout for those. We mentioned Feasting a little bit. Feasting again took that top spot just because it has such a great matchup against a lot of Persia builds, especially the aggressive Pistol Persia builds. California saw a lot of aggressive Persia builds, which is no surprise to see that Feasting took top spots. Gwyber comes out so early and can be used to just stop that Persia OTK in its tracks. Has a big flyer that can potentially even kill the Persia off. Guinevere the Jealous Queen is just such a value card. That's why I put it over there. Obviously, you can get searches with Guinevere Rukke, you can cycle through the deck, you can put big things in the grave so that you can use Earther, Keeper of the Past Earther to kill things off. It's just a very synergistic deck that works as a value engine and focuses on putting big things on the board to overwhelm the opponent. So, definitely deserves a spot. Featsing stood the test of time. Featsing's been like one of those decks that's been out since Featsing's release back in Curse of the Frozen Casket and the starter decks, so keep an eye out for this. I don't think Featsings will be going away so long as Regalia are in the game. And Gwyber. Can't forget Gwyber. And then finally we had one Val 2, which is pretty surprising. Val 2's been a deck that's just always been good, just because having 7 Gods Arts that you can get discounts on is pretty insane. Gaining all the names is great, because you get all the added benefits of every single regalia, including Artemis the Gazbo, which you see over there. Since you can remove 4 counters, destroy target J resonated with flying, that includes Priscia. You can kill Priscia if she God's Arts. Unfortunately, knowing this, Val tends to be a little weak to Alhamat, just because she's also an aggressive ruler like Priscia, but just doesn't do as much damage as soon as she comes out, so having the weakness to Black Moonbeam is just a bit of an issue. Although, you do get Imperishable with Levantine as soon as you come out, so your opponent might have to take damage before they actually have the chance to kill you off. So, always be on the lookout for this. God's Arts are good, but Valentina's just lost a little bit of favor. And then the rest of them. You got Lumia the Fate of Rebirth, Lumia Hook decks are still good, Mono White Lumia has seen a lot of French play. Lumia is just one of those rulers that's always going to be good because of how good Enter the Battlefield effects are. So having her able to just constantly recycle those effects will be a game changer for years, for at least the next year while she's going to be in standard rotation. Arla the Guardian of the Skies is a card that's never seemed to be as good as it is, until you're like, oh, I shouldn't be having any issues with this deck, and then you realize you're facing the Arla OTK, and then out of nowhere you get Arla Grisbalesta Secret Technique, and you're like, I should have been ready for that. So it's kind of a surprise. It's not really a surprising deck to face off against, but it's a deck that always needs to stay in the back of players' minds, just in case you're ever in a situation where you have to face an infinite damage combo. And then over to the right we have Valentina. Valentina and other black control rulers have fallen out of favor just a little bit because of how good a Gil Hamid is. But Valentina, Dark Alice, the new Gil Lapis saw a little bit of play. They're all still good. They're all still able to do what they do. Discard, control, board control, Valentina especially being the best at board control. You'll still see them from time to time. So, in conclusion, just to sum all this up, the metagame is looking very healthy right now. Priscia definitely dominates, but it's not like she's not without her weaknesses, she's not without her counter decks, so you shouldn't really have any problems with it. Comparing this to exactly a year ago, over on the right there you can see the AGP Montreal ruler breakdown. This was done for March 22nd, 2016, so pretty much exactly a year ago from the events that happened here. You can see the refrain took 32 spots, compared to Priscia's not really as much for Montreal. Everything seemed pretty healthy, except for when you got to the top 16, which is where maybe 15 out of the 16 spots were Reflect Refrain decks. It was just super oppressive, not fun, compared to Priscia still dominates, obviously. 15 out of 24 spots is nothing to shake a stick at, but until we see a 22 or 23 Priscia lineup in tops with no real answers, it's definitely not going to be it. Force Will has learned a lot from the mistakes they made in the past, aka Reflect Refrain, being so generic and being just an all-around toolbox card. So it's definitely good to see this breakdown. It's good to see that Priscia is so strong, but because Priscia is so strong, it makes for a healthy metagame where people know how to counter deck, and where people know how to side deck. It's just a very, very good for the game at this point. And it encourages all of you to try and beat it. So, with that said, thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I appreciate it. This was just kind of done haphazardly. I didn't really plan much out for this besides making this PowerPoint and putting together the charts for it. But I hope you guys learned something from this. I hope you learned about the state of the metagame, how everything's going, what pro players are doing, and what everybody else just wants to play around with. Try any deck out. Make sure you're ready for the hard hitters like Priscia and Alhamat. But all in all, you should have a good time with it. Just enjoy it. And with that being said, this is Mike from Deepwood Force of Will signing out. Have a good one.